one of the other things that is not included in the box, because the year that this came out in late '92 was the year that I was accepted to Clarion, which is the science fiction writing workshop. And I was accepted based in part on Tree, which is the story that's in the Funhouse. And one of the stories I wrote at Clarion is a recursive science fiction story about either Buddy or Emily at Clarion writing the story that the other one could never read.
Okay.
And that story, if I ever do a 2.0, that would be part of the fiction, because that is, this is, for me, the central conceit is like the Escher two hands drawing each other. And that is the in terms of the science, it is about that question of identity under uncertainty.
So obviously, the way you prepared for today, you're just obviously so ready to go on this traversal. And you're still very close to the work even after 20 years. 20 years now. 20 years?
At least 20 years. Some of the stuff, because I was writing it, starting in '86 was when I had the first ideas, and it sort of accelerated as the technology became more mature.
So how do you feel about it today? How do you feel about picking up the box, opening it, looking at the material, looking at the quality of your work, looking at, how do you feel about it now? That's one of the questions that Stuart and I are asking everybody about their work.
As a writer, are there things I would change? Yes. Because honestly, it is some of the writing I would go back and tweak, because I think I've learned a few things about writing. Hopefully I've learned a few things about writing in the last 20 years. I would dearly, dearly love to be able to improve some of the graphics. I cannot tell you how many nights I sat drawing dots with a mouse.
Yes.
Because you have to remember, there were no graphics tablets. There was no Photoshop. If you needed to change the tonality of part of something, you had to copy and paste something with the lasso, and then you needed to go in and move a bunch of dots. And you had to do it with those old brick-like Mac Plus mice. And, I did as well, I will say to myself now, I did as well as I could given those constraints. So I will cut my early self some slack there. But that said, I would dearly love to improve some of the graphics, because we look now at how simple it is to create immersive, full-res images, and we just did not have that technology. So I am very happy with the narrative premise, and I'm very happy with the way I executed given the constraints, but I would really wish I could fix some of those pictures.
I'd always called myself a Xerox artist in my early days.
Yeah.
Because I would make everything on Xerox. I would cut something out, Xerox it, cut out again, Xerox it, edit to things, and then you get the right tone.
Yes.
Because we didn't have color.
No.
And then I became an ASCII artist because I thought ASCII was so cool.
Yep.
And then McDaid Paint became available. It was like, oh my Lord God, I can make stuff.
Yep.
So it's real fun. I think, rather than apologize for those early works, we have to see them for what they are, and that's innovation at the time.
That's right. It is at the given that that perspective, that this is where the technology was. I think that's a problem from a curator's point of view, is to be able to look back at that with the appropriate set of constraints in mind, because um, you know, Flash was called VideoWorks, and you know, it was debuted in, I think, '87. You know, I like right at the tail end of when I was doing this. It was still a pretty funky little program.
In '99, it was so hard to use that it, you know, would take weeks and weeks and weeks to figure out what a tween meant. I mean, you couldn't understand what a tween was.
Yeah, the tools were, you know, as Spock says, I'm attempting to construct the world's first mnemonic memory circuit utilizing stone knives and bear skins.
So we had a whole section on metaphor, process, and medium, but I think we've already covered that in so much of the early discussion. But I think the next area I want to talk about is influence. So obviously the illusions, we've talked about Burroughs, and then, but I've talked to you outside today by email about who you may have influenced. And at the time you couldn't, you were kind of fishing around thinking about who that might be. Have you had time to think about who may have been influenced by your work?
I honestly don't know, and I'm not just being coy.
Yeah.
I know that the group of people that I was working with at the time, with Stewart, Moulthrop, and Michael Joyce, and Yellow Louise Douglas,
mm-hmm.
and to a certain extent Sarah Smith,
mm-hmm.
and the quote unquote Eastgate School. I know we were all influencing each other, because that was the period of time where all of this was emerging. I mean, I think of it as an emergent phenomenon from that time and place. Like the 60s were an emergent phenomenon. You know, things were coming together in a way that made something very specific happen. And you know, I don't see a unidirectional influence there. I see we were all at a particular point in time. Catherine Kramer.
Catherine Kramer,
Catherine, that was the name. The other name was trying to remember.
Well, you know, you're the only one that's put something that's had a boxed set, so to speak, that's done this kind of artist box with, I mean, even just taking the conceit away, but the notion of having multiple things in a box that pertain to a story, this is the only one. So I mean, did Bernstein decide this was too spendy? Couldn't commercialize that well? Was it that there was just a different, I mean, this was just so unique that no one could even think about that. We don't even see this in works that are strictly desktop.
Well, the problem, I think, is that I was, you know, again, at that emergent phenomenon, I think I was at the tail end of getting away with it.
Yeah.
Beyond this, I think, you know, Coover has a line in one of his New York Times reviews where he says, in the future, these are probably going to be done by teams.
Yes.
Under the direction of. And I think I just squeaked by before the crisis of realism. You know, how Betty Edwards talks about kids go through the crisis of realism when they realize that they can't draw the way things look in the world, and so they stop drawing. And I think individual writers would, beyond this level, I don't think you could produce this kind of text as a single author unless you had either an unlimited budget or an unlimited amount of time. Because at some point you have a crisis of realism, and you know you're playing in the same you're playing in the same sandbox as BioShock.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, this becomes to me Voyager.
Yeah.
I mean, what you did here was a precursor to the Voyager CDs.
Yes.
They took all of this and packaged it into one CD.
Yep.
And it took a lot of money to do it, and the
Yep.
company didn't last that long because it took so